¿Qué te animó a embarcarte en el amanecer del planeta de los simios?
I'm a lifelong Planet of the Apes fan. When I was a kid, there was a television series in the United States that lasted about 3 months, which for me seemed like most of my childhood. Um, and it introduced me to all of the characters and to the original films, and I desperately kind of wanted to be an ape. I mean, I was so that John Chambers did the makeup, and I thought it was extraordinary. So um, it really began a lifelong obsession sort of with the series. And then when I saw Rise, I was really affected by the emotionality of the story, that they re-entered the universe of Planet of the Apes through the point of view of the apes themselves. I thought that was amazing, and so I was really excited when they approached me about getting involved.
¿Cómo lidiaste con la gran cantidad de efectos especiales?
About it is that I came into the project very late, and so the story that the studio was planning on doing, I didn't want to do. So I didn't think I'd be doing the project. And then they said, well, wait, what would you want to do? And I said, well, their story wasn't really Caesar focused. It didn't focus on the apes. And I wanted to start not in the post-apocalyptic city the way their story did. I wanted to start in the ape civilization and have like a 20-minute section with just the apes, kind of like the beginning of 2001, instead of the dawn of man to do dawn of intelligent apes. And to my shock, the studio said, okay. And so as a result, we had very little time. So I actually had very little preparation. I didn't have, on a movie of this scale, you generally do a lot of what's called pre-visualization, where you do a lot of storyboarding and also animatics. And we did very, very little of that. We did some, but I made up a lot of it on the set. So it was unusual because the process by which I filmed it was very much like all of the smaller movies that I had done up to this point. And I was really shocked that that could happen, but performance capture actually makes that possible because the technology is really just a device that records the movement of the face, the movement of the body, so that the animators can then translate that onto the anatomy of an ape. But other than that, there's no real technical trick to dealing with the actors. So I would walk onto the set with Andy Serkis and I'd say, well, let's talk about where it feels like you'd be standing. And then we just start working on the movie, which for a movie of this scale, never having done one of this scale, I didn't realize it would be as similar to the other films I'd made. And that was actually really great for me.
¿Cuál es tu escena favorita de la película?
Wow, that's a very hard question for me to answer. I can say that one of the scenes that's very close to my heart is the scene where Caesar's baby's born. Because what I wanted to do was I wanted to create an opening that got you immersed in the sort of inner lives of these apes where there was very, very little to no dialogue. And where by the time that I wanted it to start off frightening, like 2001. You see them in this kind of elemental primal state. And then as you spent more time with them, you would start to see their inner lives and the emotion and the idea of coming home from that hunt and then seeing his wife give birth. It felt like a very intimate moment. And the intimacy of the film was almost the most important thing to me. I mean, obviously the movie's about spectacle and there's all kinds of sort of grand battle scenes and that kind of stuff, but the emotion of it was the thing that was most important to me. And interestingly, when I came in to meet with the studio, I rewatched Rise, and in the interim between the first and second time that I'd seen the movie, I had a son. And when I watched the movie the second time, Andy Serkis reminded me of my son. It was this thing where I saw in my son's eyes all of his comprehension of what was going on around him, but he couldn't yet quite speak. He was saying like a couple words. And you could see all of these emotions and all this understanding, but his struggle to speak. And I saw that that's what Andy was doing as Caesar. So it had a very personal resonance for me. So I wanted the movie to very much be about fathers and sons. And so for him to have a son at the beginning of the movie, another son, a baby, I guess was a very personal thing for me. So I don't know if it's my favorite scene, but it's one of the scenes that's the closest to my heart.
¿Cuáles fueron tus influencias en el rodaje?
Well, you know, there were a lot of references. What was really interesting to me, I mean, obviously I was excited to re-enter the universe of the Planet of the Apes, which I knew so fondly from my childhood, and do it from a new perspective. But I was very interested in the idea of taking classical forms. So like the Western. Like one of my favorite movies is Unforgiven, and I love John Ford movies, The Searchers. There's actually literally like visual references to The Searchers. But what I thought would be interesting would be to take something that was completely fantastical, which is obviously the intelligent apes, but do the story in a very traditional, classical, mythic, archetypical way. And so the story is really a story of two families, a human family and an ape family, almost as if there are two tribes, or you know, in an American film, the Western would be like the cowboys and Indians, and there would be this question about whether or not they could find a way to coexist. And by using the classical form, the whole story could be about an anatomy of violence, of how, because we know that it becomes Planet of the Apes. We know that it doesn't become Planet of the Humans and the Apes. And so the whole thing then becomes about character, and then what is it within us that we can't resist violence, and how is that sort of played out in the story? So that was part of it. Apocalypse Now was a movie that really influenced me, the idea of going into the wild and seeing them in this tribal way. 2001, the beginning of the movie, is very inspired by 2001. So there are a lot of different, Saving Private Ryan, like we do a thing where they go into the battle, and the battle is unlike Rise, where you're so rooting for the apes to win. This was a more complex and disturbing situation, and it was really Caesar's son's awakening to the horrors of battle. So in that way, it was kind of like a moment out of Saving Private Ryan, where he suddenly is seeing the terror of violence for the first time. So there are many influences, I guess, that have all filtered their way in, and obviously it's Planet of the Apes that was my love that brought me into it, but it's all of these other references that I was interested in somehow reflecting as well.
¿Dónde planeas llevar la trama en la próxima entrega?
I'm supposed to direct the next movie. You know, what happened was when I showed the very early cut to the studio, and what's so interesting is when you're editing this movie, because of the performance capture, the effects take so long to accomplish that you actually have a version of the movie for a very long time. You're editing for about a year. And for the first 6 months at least, you have virtually no shots of apes. So it's shots of Andy Serkis and Toby Kebbell, the other ape performers, all wearing like this helmet that has a camera here and dots on their faces, and gray body unitards with dots all over them. And I showed a version of the movie to the studio in that form. And the actors are so wonderful, Andy Serkis and Toby, they're so great, that the story already worked. It worked without apes. And when they saw it, they were very excited about the direction that the story was going, and they asked me if I would be interested in continuing the story. And even though it was very early on, I took that as a big vote of confidence, and I am. I mean, I love these characters and I love this world, so I'm very excited about continuing the story.